The sea ice over the Arctic is melting and shrinking so fast, we will see in our lifetime something that hasn't happened, it's believed, since the end of the last ice age, the opening of an ocean, the Arctic Ocean. And with that, access to trade routes and trillions of dollars worth of oil and natural gas, almost as much as the entire U.S. economy. But this isn't a story about climate change. This is a story about the competition for those riches. The Russians, for instance, have already amassed a major military presence in the region. It's also about pioneers, U.S. scientists and naval personnel learning to tough it out in the harshness of this still ice-covered frontier. We discovered just how harsh on a recent trip to the Arctic. The Arctic Ocean sits on top of the globe, encircled by Russia, which encompasses about half of its coastline, Norway, Greenland, Canada, and the United States, thanks to Alaska. We flew as guests of the Navy from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, 200 miles in the direction of the North Pole, over fractured, thinning ice, to a spot where the ice was still thick enough to support this base camp. It was a small, temporary village, disrupting the peace and purity of the ice, white as far as the eye can see. The camp was built for a scientific and military exercise called ICEX 2016.
Hi,
everyone.
Welcome,
How do you do? Nice to meet you.
Welcome.
For 5 weeks, this no man's land of ice was home to an expeditionary team of sailors, scientists, and engineers whose mission was to understand how to survive in maybe the most hostile conditions on Earth. The Navy says those taking part in this exercise are the first humans ever to set foot on this part of the planet.
It's actually beautiful beyond belief, isn't it?
It really is.
Chuck McGuire was one of the first to arrive. He's an engineer with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Lab that was brought in to build this camp from scratch.
So you get off the plane, there's nothing. There's no shelter, there's no indoors.
No.
There was just ice.
Ice everywhere. That's right.
And you say, how am I going to survive?
You pick up a hammer and start building.
They built a makeshift city called Sargo for roughly 60 people, consisting of a command post, tight living quarters, a mess hall stocked with food airlifted in weekly, and some very primitive toilet facilities.
That outhouse is really cold.
Outhouse is awful. Oh my God. So what about water? You can't just eat the ice, right?
You can if you know what you're looking for.
This ice mining team knows what to look for: old sea ice that's been baking in the sun long enough that the salt has leached out.
Ice mining team, we are returning back to camp.
They bring back chunks to melt down into the camp's only drinking water.
All the things that you take for granted in normal civilization, right? Shelter, food, the ease of going to the bathroom, right? That is all different out here.
What qualities do you think it takes to stay here and survive out here for weeks?
I think maybe you have to be a little off initially and really understand that everything outside that door is trying to kill you here.
If the ice and wind don't get you, polar bears might. An armed sentry patrols the perimeter of the camp in case one comes looking for food.
All right, good evening, everyone. Another successful day here at Sargo.
There's a daily briefing in the command post to coordinate the various researchers who are studying and trying to understand this part of the world as they plan for a more sustained presence here. They're analyzing, among other things,
the ice flow's moved about 9 miles to the west-northwest today.
How climate change is affecting the way the ice here drifts and migrates.
It feels like you're on land. You get the sense that you're on land. It's very firm and, the plane could land. But we're moving, which is kind of astonishing.
I think every day it's interesting to wake up and recognize you're 8 or 9 miles from where you were the day before. Looks the same, but it's pretty interesting to figure that out.
The ice moves that much every day in unpredictable directions because of the currents underwater and the wind above.
Down here, we're
23 degrees Celsius.
Also unpredictable is the weather. We met a team of meteorologists using balloons to help with forecasting, which is key for any military operation.
So these balloons measure your temperature, your dew point, the wind speed.
Commander Scott Parker, a meteorologist with the Navy's Atlantic Submarine Force, says there's virtually no weather data collected up here. In other parts of the world, meteorologists rely on satellites for forecasting. But up here near the North Pole, satellite coverage is minimal.
How cold does it get up here? Because it's right now, I don't know.
It's
People
freezing,
can see
right?
it's
the
terribly
lowest we've had is 26 below Fahrenheit, and today's actually our warmest day.
Come on.
And right now is 6 below.
And with this wind chill factor, because the wind is really blowing.
It is terrible. It's about 25 below zero with a wind chill.
And you telling me this is the warmest day you've had?
This is the warmest day we've had so far.
Do you want to go inside?
I do. Let's go.
The temperature can drop to as low as 50 below, and that can wreak havoc on just about everything. Weapons, communication systems, sensors, and people, including these Navy divers who were here to test their latest cold weather gear and their endurance in the frigid water. These robotics engineers are conducting underwater experiments in a temperature-controlled tent. When we were there, Doug Horner and his team were field testing these underwater drones for the first time in the Arctic.
When we first put it in, we checked the ballast.
The drones are collecting scientific data about the Arctic, where the water gets warmer the deeper you go. They're also getting a picture of what it looks like down below.
My primary emphasis here is the ability to map the under ice. So we have sensors, sonar specifically, which is sound, which is focused upwards. And what we hope to do with continually putting sound upwards is to make a map.
You're mapping the bottom of the ice?
Yes, the underneath portion of the ice.
Uh-huh. And why is that important?
I want to be able to navigate relative to that. So this is the idea of being able to navigate an underwater robot accurately without GPS. Because in the ice, you don't have the opportunity to come up to the surface for a GPS fix.
He says these drones could also be used to patrol the waters of the Arctic looking for enemy subs, for instance, the way drones hover in the sky over a battlefield. The Navy is testing this technology and amassing all of this research to prepare for an expanded presence in the Arctic as the ice continues to melt. The Russians are already there in force. Last year, they staged a military exercise in the Arctic, as seen in this Russian Ministry of Defense footage. It involved about 40,000 troops, 15 submarines, 41 warships, and multiple aircraft. No one disputes their right to do that on their own territory. It's just that it wasn't announced.
We pre-announce ours. No one is surprised by them. Whereas the exercise that Russia did was a snap exercise, which is a bit destabilizing.
Until May of this year, retired four-star General Philip Breedlove was the supreme Allied commander of NATO with responsibility for the Arctic. What else is destabilizing, he says, is Russia's military buildup along something called the Northern Sea Route skirting the Russian Arctic coastline. The route could become an alternative to the Suez Canal, saving huge amounts of time and money for the commercial shipping industry.
I have heard as much as 28 days decrease in some of the transit from the Northern European markets to the Asian markets. That is an incredible economic opportunity, and it could be a very big boon to business around the world.
What would it mean if the Russians did gain control over the Northern Sea Route?
If the Russians had the ability to militarily hold that at ransom, that is a big lever over the world economy.
So tell us in a nutshell what's happening.
Along that route, what we see is Russia upgrading over 50 airfields and ports, 14 of them to be done this year, increasing the number of ground troops, putting in surface-to-air missiles, putting in sensors that could be used to guide weapons, that could be used to deny access.
In 2007, Russia went so far as to plant its flag on the seafloor under the North Pole.
I think it's important to understand what the Deputy Prime Minister said, that the Arctic is a part of Russia, that they will provide the defense for the Arctic, and that they will make money in the Arctic, and that the Western world may therefore bring sanctions on them, but that's okay, because tanks don't need visas. I think it sends a pretty clear message.
The U.S. has not tried to match the Russian buildup. The Navy relying on its fleet of nuclear and attack submarines, the most powerful in the world. When we were there, the Navy was conducting a submarine warfare exercise, something it does in the Arctic every 2 years. When a sub surfaces in the Arctic, they use shovels to carve a visual landmark in the ice that the sub can see. X literally marks the spot. But that X is a moving target because of the drifting ice.
There we go.
Which makes maneuvering a windowless steel cylinder the size of a football field to such a pinpoint location seem impossible. But on this day, the skipper and his crew, punching up through thick ice, nailed it on their first try. It took a few minutes for the sail, the shark fin on top, to completely emerge.
There they are.
When they popped the hatch, a special guest climbed out, the Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, who'd been on board for 5 days, taking part in the naval exercise.
What does it mean that the Secretary of the Navy has come up to the Arctic? Is there a special significance to you being here?
Our responsibilities are increasing as the Arctic ice melts, as the climate changes, and so the Navy has got to be here. We've got to provide that presence, and I hope that my presence emphasizes what we do.
As he flew off to Alaska, we climbed down the ladder into the fast-attack, nuclear-powered USS Hampton and went through a 100-degree change in temperature, from 25 below to about 75.
Do you feel claustrophobic?
Oh, no, not at all.
No.
You get used to it.
Commander of the Hampton, Theron Davis, took us to the control room as the crew prepared to submerge.
Very well. Stationary dive the ship. Stationary dive the ship, aye, sir. Dive. Stationary dive the ship. Make your depth 150 feet.
What he and his crew of 20-somethings are practicing is something subs only do in the Arctic. Diving down through new ice that had formed around the sub.
What is that?
That's the ice breaking away. It's the first time we surfaced through this thick ice and stayed up this long. So that's the ice that's beside us. And as we go down, it's got to crack away from the hull.
We're listing. I'm tilting this way.
Cycle lap fence.
Cycle lap fence, aye, sir. 5 on 9. 5 on 9.
Now we're starting to see water. See the water on the monitor? That's only water.
Once they get to a cruising level, they practice hide and seek with another sub. In some of the exercises, they also test fire blank torpedoes.
So I'm going to show you a torpedo tube.
One of their challenges is ice keels, huge chunks of ice that jut down from the surface and confuse sonar-guided torpedoes that can't distinguish them from enemy submarines.
So what we're working on is saying, hey, how can we fix that? How do we know we're going to, we can go and shoot a weapon in the ice and get a hit? Right, so now we have to go up there and we have to figure that out.
We return to the surface.
We're coming up right now. We're 122 feet.
One American sub in a region with a growing Russian military presence. During our last day at the camp, something dramatic happened. A crack in the ice along the perimeter became a giant lake. New fissures formed right through the heart of the camp, up to the doorstep of the command post. Everything was packed up quickly for an emergency evacuation, a reminder that the most formidable adversary here may not be Russian forces, but the forces of nature.
Coral reefs are often called the rainforests of the ocean. They're not just biologically diverse and stunningly beautiful, they're a source of food and income for nearly 1 billion people. They're also in danger. Scientists estimate that 25% of the world's reefs have died off, and much of what's left is at risk. There is, however, one spot in the Caribbean that marine biologists describe as a kind of underwater Eden, a coral reef largely untouched by man. It's called the Gardens of the Queen, and getting permission to go there isn't easy. It's located off the coast of Cuba, and as you might have already guessed, there are no direct flights. Our first stop was Havana, Cuba's crumbling capital, where music fills the air, old cars seem to run forever, and the only ads you see are for the revolution. From there, we drove for 6 hours through the countryside and then took a boat for 6 hours more until we got to a stretch of tiny islands 50 miles off Cuba's southern coast. The islands are little more than patches of mangroves and small spits of sand. The only inhabitants who greeted us, hermit crabs and iguanas. They seemed indifferent to our arrival. It was Christopher Columbus who named this area the Gardens of the Queen after his queen Isabella. But the real gardens he probably never even got a glimpse of. To see them, you have to go underwater.
This is really the most incredibly well-protected and flourishing reef I've ever seen.
We went diving with David Guggenheim, an American marine biologist and a senior fellow at the Ocean Foundation in Washington, D.C.
The corals are healthy, the fish are healthy and abundant. There are predators here, large sharks. It's the way these ecosystems really should look.
You're saying this is like a time capsule almost?
It's a living time machine, and it's a really incredible opportunity to learn from.
We brought special scuba masks with us so we could talk underwater. Every time we went diving, we could see sharks circling our boat before we even went in. David said they wouldn't bother us, and we certainly hoped he was right. The first thing you notice in this underwater Eden is the coral, its color, its texture. Coral isn't a rock or a plant, it's colonies of tiny animals that share a common skeleton. This is a large and relatively rare specimen of pillar coral. Those hair-like things are the tentacles of thousands of individual animals that are plucking microscopic plankton from the water. Coral is one of the oldest living animals on the planet. Some of it said to be 4,000 years old, older than the tallest redwood. What makes coral reefs so important is that they host an extraordinary variety of fish. Some come here for shelter from predators, others come here to eat.
I've been diving in many places all over the world, and I've never seen so many large fish like this grouper here. There's about 6 or 7 Caribbean reef sharks exist, circling around right now. Scientists will tell you the presence of so many sharks and different species of sharks is a sign it's a very healthy reef.
When we call coral reefs the rainforests of the ocean, we're talking about the diversity of life that lives on these reefs, the relationships among these animals, the fact that the corals create a home for the fish, that there are little fish that feed big fish, that some of these little shrimp walk inside the mouths of the grouper and clean parasites off of the grouper. It's a very complex web of life.
You seem pleased to see all these predators, all these sharks around.
They're a very important part of the ecosystem, and we've kind of forgotten that because we've taken about 90% of the sharks out of the world's oceans over the last 50 years.
90% of the sharks have been killed already.
90% of the sharks are gone from the planet now, along with other predators like tuna and swordfish, these predators that we just love to eat.
Another predator under threat is the Goliath grouper, but here they're a common sight. This one is about 200 pounds and shows no fear of a 160-pound correspondent.
It's amazing how sort of curious this grouper is. It just comes up and looks you right in the eye. David, do you ever see a grouper this big elsewhere? Never in my life. It's a critically endangered species. When you say critically endangered, what do you mean? Critically endangered is pretty much the highest level of endangerment before a species goes extinct completely.
The one species David wishes he didn't see thriving in the Gardens of the Queen is the lionfish. They appear to have been accidentally introduced into these waters by man. They have venomous spines and no natural predators.
The lionfish is a beautiful fish. The problem is it doesn't belong here. It belongs in the Pacific. It's got a voracious appetite, and it's eating the local species.
David Guggenheim is working with Fabian Pina, a Cuban marine biologist. He leads a team that's been studying the reef for the Cuban Ministry of Science. They've already identified 7 species of marine life that they believe are new to science. We saw a 200-pound grouper. Is that the biggest grouper that there is here?
Well, no, we have seen larger than that. We have seen some specimen of Goliath grouper like 400, 600 pounds.
400, 600 pounds?
Yeah, it's like a small car.
The one I saw, the 200-pound one, I had the sense if I took a few inches too close, it would let me know.
Yeah, sure. Maybe you hear down the water, boom, boom. That's the sound that is like saying, this is my territory, so keep distance and dive and enjoy, but all the things around are mine.
Where did you learn to speak grouper?
Well, you know, since 15 years ago.
Fabian Pina's office is little more than a shack built on posts in the water. He was starting to explain why he liked working here so much when we were interrupted by one of his neighbors. Wow, did you see that?
Magnificent, yeah.
Did you guys get, you didn't get that, no one got that, did they? Huge bird just swooped down, that was cool. Fabian told us 9-foot crocodiles have paid him a visit as well. Really?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna readjust here and bring my leg up from dangling over the edge of the water.
Right there is now it's a great barracuda.
Right there? Yeah.
Right there. So this is the only place where you can see from your porch an animal like that. So it's wonderful.
It's wonderful and increasingly rare. Only after seeing a place like this can you start to fully appreciate the tragedy that's occurring elsewhere in the oceans.
In 2002, I went to Veracruz, Mexico, and I was told about the magnificence of the Veracruz reefs. And when we got there, we saw that 95% of that reef had died, and it had died quickly since the last time scientists were there. And I felt like I was going through a city. A magnificent civilization had once stood there, but it was burned out. Nobody was there.
Scientists say the world's reefs are being harmed by a complex combination of factors, including pollution, agricultural runoff, coastal development, and overfishing. It turns out fish are essential to the health of a reef. Researchers at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and other leading institutions are also very concerned about climate change, because they believe rising ocean temperatures are triggering a process called bleaching, in which the coral weakens, turns white, and often dies.
This is a disaster in slow motion. It's been happening for decades, and it's much more difficult to see it happening, let alone get alarmed about it happening.
Scientists are always using the term crisis. Is it really that bad, what's happening under the water?
Things are really that bad. We've already lost 25% of the world's coral reefs, and within 20 years, it'll be another 25%.
This is big. This is nice. This can be like 10, 15 years old fish.
The reason this reef's doing so well, Fabian Pina believes, is that it's far from the mainland and well protected.
That's a big fish.
In 1996, the government of Fidel Castro, a diver himself, made this area one of the largest marine preserves in the Caribbean. Almost all commercial fishing was banned. Since then, Fabian Pina's research shows the number of fish has increased dramatically. How much have fish populations grown here?
Between 30 and 50%.
30 and 50%?
Yeah, that's huge.
Fabian and David have noticed some bleaching here, but the coral tends to recover after a few months, leading them to wonder whether there's something about this reef that's making it more resistant to threats.
Maybe it's because this ecosystem is being protected. It's got a leg up on other ecosystems around the world that are being heavily fished and heavily impacted by pollution. So that makes it more resilient. That's one of the theories, that if we do what we can locally, that these reefs have a better chance of being resilient to what's happening globally.
So something here holds the key to figuring out how to save these other reefs and bring them back in some cases.
That's what I think.
Tourism here is tightly regulated. Only 500 fly fishermen and 1,000 divers are permitted to come each year, and the fishermen have to release their catch. Andres Jimenez helps run the only place to stay out here, a handful of boats operated by a company called Avalon. It's a joint venture between the Cuban government and an Italian company, and it employs a lot of former fishermen and their families, giving them a stake in preserving the area and keeping commercial fishing boats out. If there was commercial fishing here
If
now?
there was commercial fishing
you
here,
think all the fish-
or not only that, if we weren't here protecting and taking care of all the area, it would be poof, very fast. There's no way you can keep it safe.
All these big
it's
fish.
Too big. It's
all
too
these,
big.
All the sharks,
yeah,
the grouper, all the big fish would all be gone.
They would take it in one day.
The fish aren't the only creatures here that enjoy protection. The crocodiles are free to hunt in the shallow water near the islands. Even these giant rodents called hutia are fearless. Elsewhere in Cuba, they're made into stew. Here, no one can hunt them.
They feel very safe here because we would never eat one of these things.
Andres wanted to show us what the reef looked like at night. So with some trepidation, we plunged into the black water. The darkness was so complete, we felt like we were swimming through space. But we found plenty of life on the sea floor.
You see that? That is one big crab. At night, you find all sorts of sea creatures that you would never see during the day, like this crab right here, which we interrupted in the middle of its dinner. And Anderson, I want to show you these big moray eel here.
The eel didn't seem to want company. So we moved on. We spent several nights and days exploring the reef, swimming through tunnels of living coral 100 feet below the surface. We were so close to sharks so often, it was tempting to touch them. It takes some time to adjust to the routine wonders of this place. But after a while, even we began to feel like residents of the reef.
You know, in the conservation world, the work that I do, a lot of it is pretty negative. You know, things have gotten pretty bad. So to come to a place like this and see it so alive, you know, I feel like a teenager again. I feel like there really is hope.
Every now and then, just for the fun of it, we decide to go off to some obscure place that you've never heard of and are not likely to visit. Tonight, we're taking you to Eigg, or the People's Republic of Eigg, as it's jokingly referred to, in Scotland, a country where half the privately held land is owned by fewer than 500 people. A lot of it is tied up in huge estates owned by lairds, who often run them as fiefdoms. 20 years ago, after 2 centuries of servility, the people of Eigg drove away their laird and seized control of their own destiny, establishing the first community-owned estate in Scotland's history. We wanted to see what they've made of it. Just 3 miles wide, 6 miles long, and 10 miles off the Scottish coast, Eigg is part of the Inner Hebrides, surrounded by the Isles of Rum, Muck, and Skye at the edge of the North Atlantic. It's an ungroomed masterpiece of nature, too wild to tame, a craggy isle of incredible beauty populated mostly by sheep and the dogs that keep track of them. The people do their best to stay clear while taking everything in.
So what's your average day like?
Some people would say very lazy. I like to think I just make the hard work look easy. All depends on your outlook.
Charlie Galley is the taxi driver on Eigg and the only source of public transportation up and down the island's furrowed main artery. It's a niche he claimed for himself when he arrived from the mainland with his wife and this aging Volvo 4 years ago. Plenty of time to get the feel of the place.
You know everybody on the island?
I know them and their shoe sizes, and like I say, there's no secrets on an island, so...
So what are they talking about this week?
Mainly you.
It's not like they don't get visitors. 12,000 tourists came here last year, most of them to spend only a few hours. There are very few places to stay. We were going to be here for days, asking questions about Egg's quirky history. And everyone directed us to Maggie Fife, the island secretary, who landed here 41 years ago after touring Afghanistan in a camper.
I never imagined that I would spend the rest of my life here.
Does that mean you like it?
I think so, yeah.
It was 1976, just after the entire island had been purchased by a wealthy English toff named Keith Schellenberg, who became the 7th Laird of Eigg.
Welcome to Eigg.
Under Scotland's feudal landlord system, he had absolute power over virtually every aspect of his estate.
What kind of impact did he have on people's lives?
He had that control over everything, and people, jobs, houses, and he wouldn't give anybody a lease on anything.
By all accounts, Schellenberg used the island as his personal playground, lavishly entertaining guests and driving about in a 1927 Rolls-Royce, while most of his tenants lived in poverty without electricity.
Was there a rebellion?
Eventually, yeah.
It started with a slow burn that burst into flames one night in 1994, when Schellenberg's beloved Rolls-Royce met a fiery end, burnt to a crisp like a slice of bacon, under circumstances still unexplained.
A mysterious fire, spontaneous combustion, who knows?
So did you ever figure out what happened to the Rolls-Royce?
No.
Headline writers all over Britain couldn't believe their luck. There was scrambled egg, burnt rolls, and egg comes to the boil. It went on for a year until Schellenberg gave up, expressing his disdain for the islanders in this BBC interview.
I think that my ultimate failure with egg is that I can't be bothered to try and get on with them anymore.
His final act was to sell the island to a wacky German who called himself Maruma and claimed to be an artist of note and a professor. He turned out to be neither. Up to his beret in debt, Maruma stopped paying people's wages, and within 2 years, creditors put Egg up for auction. Maggie Fife and others thought, why not buy the island for ourselves?
By the time we got to Maruma, and 2 years of somebody that was living in Stuttgart and had only visited for 4 days, it had convinced everybody that we wouldn't have to do very much to do better than what he'd done, which was nothing.
No one in Scotland had ever tried a community buyout before, certainly not 64 residents on a depressed, undeveloped island with no cash or credit. But lots of people were familiar with their story and fancied the idea of wee folk taking on the big guys. In 1997, a public fundraising campaign brought in $2.5 million to close the deal. The funds came from 10,000 individual contributors and one huge check from an unknown woman.
The bulk of the money came from a mystery benefactor.
A mystery benefactor? Sounds like Dickens.
It's a pretty crazy story, really.
You don't know who she is?
The only string attached was that she remained anonymous.
She ever been to the island?
Not as far as I know.
Do you know why she did it?
I think she's given money to a lot of what she regards as good causes, and we were lucky enough to be one of them.
That was 20 years ago. The Eggers and their friends marked the 2 decades of self-rule with a big blowout they call a ceilidh, with traditional music, dancing, and drink. We decided to cancel the next day's shoot to allow time for recovery, but 24 hours wasn't enough.
What time did you leave the ceilidh?
It's about 8 a.m. I think when we finally left, yeah.
How long did it take you to recover?
Probably tomorrow.
Johnny Jobson first experienced Egg in his 20s, working on a fishing boat as a scallop diver. Since then, a lot has changed. One, there is electricity now, which allowed him to move his wife and family here last year and edit a sports journal online from their tiny cottage. It's required some sacrifices, but they love the beauty of the place and its eccentricities.
You'll look at the scenery or you'll see a pod of dolphins come through and you just remind yourself how lucky you are.
You seem to have a lot of characters on this island.
Yeah.
Were they normal when they came here?
Yeah, not all of us.
Dean Wiggin turned up in a kayak 14 years ago, and he's still here. He's very good at fixing things. Jobs are extremely scarce, so you have to bring one with you or use your wits to invent one.
It's one of those places that really gets into your soul. I think it's quite enchanting.
Sarah Bowden runs her uncle's sheep farm on Egg. She grew up here, then left to work as a music journalist in London, where she met her future partner, Johnny Lynch, one of Scotland's most popular musicians. She coaxed him to Egg.
Did you think he was going to come?
not really. No, because I was living in a caravan at the time, and it was all quite rustic.
Yeah, you did look a bit shocked.
And Johnny's, proper suburban city. What? Well, you're not an actual country boy, are you?
If you mean I look after my nails, then yes I do. But I knew from as soon as I got here, I couldn't really see a reason for me to go back. And just look at me now.
Look at you now.
See if you can spell it.
When it comes to the essentials on Eigg, there is basically one of everything. One primary school for 5 students, one grocery shop where 100 islanders all choose from the same food, and one pub at the tea room down by the wharf, where the best beer is local. Stu McCarthy and Gabe McVarish, who are both married to women who grew up on Eigg, got so tired of drinking the mass-produced stuff from the mainland, they started their own mini microbrewery 2 years ago.
So this is it. Is this legal?
It's legal. It's legal.
They make 8 different brews, including I Am the Eggman, which is very popular with the tourists. They're just beginning to turn a profit, but say they've saved a lot of money drinking their own beer.
Are you the biggest selling beer on Eigg?
Thankfully, yes. Yeah, we can say that.
None of these younger people would be here without the island's tiny but unique power grid that runs almost entirely on renewable energy, a combination of wind, hydroelectric, and solar, the first time it's ever been accomplished anywhere.
That is the biggest and most impressive project that we've done.
It changed everything, right?
Oh yeah, it's made life so much easier.
It was designed and funded with multiple grants, mostly from the European Union, and engineers from all over the world have come to study it. Like everything else on Eigg, it is run and maintained by revolving committees of islanders, the only visible sign of any sort of government. There are no offices, no court system, no police.
Is there any crime on the island?
There's no crime or anything.
Never?
Not that I can remember.
Nobody's snatched something or borrowed something? Or...
They borrow it, and you'll get it usually within the week, returned to you kind of thing. You just don't know where it is at that point in time when you're looking for it. But it will turn up again. It can't go anywhere, it's on an island, so yeah.
What happens if somebody gets sick?
Well, you basically have to be sick on a Tuesday. The doctor comes from Skye on a Tuesday, spends the day here. And that's sometimes weather permitting, if it's really rough in the winter time.
Eigg is dependent on boats for everything. When a ferry comes in with fuel and food, people flock to the wharf to help out. It's not a courtesy, it's a necessity on an island where everyone is more or less scraping by. To survive, they have to rely on each other, look after each other, and put up with each other. The island is too small for feuds or lingering resentments.
What's the difference between people who live on the mainland and people who live on Eigg?
Well, the people on Eigg, I'd have to say, are more evolved.
Charlie Galley, the taxi driver and amateur philosopher, says most people here have done the whole life on the mainland thing and rejected it.
They're all doing their hamster wheel thing,
Hamster wheel?
Yeah. You get a mortgage, you get a car, you get a job, or you do this, that, and the next thing. And they all get so involved, they forget to look about them and see what's actually going on in life,
You should know Eigg is not always served sunny side up. As the days get shorter, the windy, rainy weather turns to sleet with gusts up to 100 miles an hour. The boats might not get through for a week, so people keep lots of beans and Spam in the storeroom. Even the sheepdogs look forlorn.
If you accidentally open your mouth when a gust of wind's coming, it involuntarily fills your lungs. You're like...
To live here, you have to be resilient, self-sufficient, and patient. And not just with the sheep.
The cows like to go down and lie on the beach, on the sand. And they'll all trail down the road, so you can't argue with a cow, It wants to do what it wants to do, and you've just got to give it plenty of time,
There are no grand ambitions here and no discernible interest in development, despite the sea, the cliffs, and the vistas. The owners don't want hotels or a Donald Trump golf course or hundreds of new residents.
I think we're looking for 1 or 2 at a time. I think that's how it works here. Then it works a lot better. And we've got time to get used to new people.
We would have liked to stay longer in this stress-free, non-conflict zone where everyone seems to be more or less on the same page. But we were out of clean laundry, we had a ferry to catch, and hamster wheels to jump back onto. As for the people of Eigg, I don't think they were sad to see us go. "60 Minutes is constantly on the lookout for places we've never been before. So when our late colleague Bob Simon heard about a magical place in the Hebrides Islands off the coast of Scotland, known for making some of the great whiskies in the world, well, the story spoke to him. The place is called Islay, and it's one of 5 whiskey-producing regions in Scotland that make an expensive type of Scotch called single malt. Islay's distilleries turn out relatively small amounts of their own handcrafted brands for a worldwide luxury market that's more than doubled in size in the last decade and become the spirit equivalent of the fine wine business. Bob liked good Scotch and beautiful places, so he went off to Scotland. He died before he could finish the piece, leaving behind a stack of videotapes and some random notes. We decided to finish it for him and raise a glass in his memory. Islay is a small island 20 miles off the west coast of Scotland. There are few trees, miles of windswept heather, and some of the most fertile agricultural land in Scotland. There are sheep and cattle everywhere and an abundance of wildlife. But that's not why people come here. This is 8 small distilleries that produce some of the world's finest single malt whiskies.
This is the whole lifeblood of this island and everybody on it. This is all we know.
Jim McEwen has been working at Islay's distillery since he was 15 years old. He's now master of the works at Bruichladdich.
I just thank God that he chose the Scots and gave them whiskey, because we appreciate the gift and we look after it.
They've been making it here since the 15th century, when supposedly some monks taught the locals how to use barley, water, and yeast to make a spirit the Scots now call the water of life. They've been perfecting it for 600 years. The distilleries are easy to find, but hard to pronounce. Ardbeg, Bamore, Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain, Colilla, Kilchoman, Lagavulin, and Lefroy. As Bob Simon noted, they get harder to pronounce the more you visit.
For us guys on the west coast of Scotland, whiskey is a religion because it's a provider. And the great thing about whiskey is not just a drink, it's much more than that. Have you ever watched some old Hollywood movies?
Yes, I have.
Scotch was always portrayed in Hollywood as a whiskey when you were down or you were in trouble. The one thing that was going to get you back on your feet and out there was a Scotch.
Today, if you're down on your luck, you probably can't afford an Islay single malt. The good ones start at around $70 a bottle. The rare ones can go for hundreds of dollars a glass at chic whiskey bars around the world, where they're known for their distinctive smoky taste. It comes from peat, the mossy earthen fuel that's cut from bogs on the island. It was used to heat Scottish homes for centuries and is still used to toast the barley at Islay distilleries. John Campbell is the master distiller at Lefroy, one of the top-selling single malts in America.
Peat is the thing that makes Islay unique, and it really resonates with people, and it just engenders a kind of love-hate relationship, and the people that love it absolutely love it with a passion.
And there seems to be no shortage of them. Islay is not easy to get to, usually requiring multiple flights, a long drive, and a 2-hour ferry ride. Yet enthusiasts continue to make the pilgrimage, especially for the Whiskey Festival.
We get literally thousands upon thousands of single malt tourists coming here. They come from all over the world just to set foot on Islay.
To study it?
No, to drink it. It's lovely. It's clean, it's fresh, it's vibrant.
Officially, Whiskey Fest is a celebration of Islay's culture, but mostly it's about drinking.
Absolutely beautiful. No off notes at all.
As they listen to Jim McEwen extol the virtues of Bruichladdich, the novitiates, connoisseurs, and whiskey snobs approached each glass with reverence bordering on the religious.
Oh, wow. The fruit in that is incredible.
As the glasses empty, the smiles got bigger. But the islanders will tell you that all of this warmth and good feeling comes not from the alcohol in the spirits, but from the spirit of the place. It is almost mystical, beautiful, dramatic, and quiet. There's no road rage, barely any traffic. If you do get hung up, it's probably because of a farm animal. They have the right of way. And if you do happen upon people, they'll almost always greet you with the Islay wave.
So everybody just waves because it's just friendly. There's not so many of us, so you just wave to say hi.
It's what Ailsa Hayes liked about the island when she moved her family here from London to take a manager's position at one of Islay's thriving distilleries.
It's strange, is it not, that such a small place with so few people, your products are known everywhere in the world.
I know. Well, it makes us all very proud. It does. There's such a boom worldwide for single malts. It's fantastic, and you can really feel that on the island. A lot of the distilleries have doubled production, and so there's a lot of opportunities there as well.
And there's no reason to believe that that won't continue.
Well, times are good, people drink. Times are bad, people drink.
Is it possible to be socially acceptable to be a teetotaler on this island?
Yes.
Are there any?
Yes. No, I'm not one of them.
Over the years, the island's people have learned how to entertain themselves, often at gatherings called ceilidhs, which feature traditional dance and sad songs, mostly about leaving Islay and yearning to return.
To sit with my love on the bridge above the rippling waterfall, to go back home, never more to roam, is my dearest wish of all.
If this looks and feels a lot like Ireland, that's no coincidence. It's only 25 miles away. They come from the same tribe, share the same Celtic culture and Gaelic language, not to mention a love of good whiskey that gets them through stormy weather and the long winter nights. There are no movie theaters on Islay, no dry cleaners, no supermarkets, no McDonald's, at least in the fast food business. Jim McEwen says there's a long list of things that Islay doesn't have and doesn't want.
We don't have any crime. We don't have mugging, carjacking, housebreaking, rape, just dope, drugs. We don't have that. You can keep that. You're very welcome to it.
How do you explain the fact that there's no crime here? There's crime everywhere else.
If you commit a crime in a small community, you will be ostracized and have to leave. Not only that, your family, your children and your children's children will be remembered as the children of the man who committed the crime.
Most Scots are forthright, practical people who are proud of their country and the fact that their most famous export has withstood the test of time. They see themselves as artisans, and making whiskey is more about art and alchemy than manufacturing. Every distiller has their own secrets and superstitions. We'll give you the unclassified 2-minute tour. Sorry, we can't offer you free samples. It begins with a bit of trickery on the malting floor, when barley that's been soaked in water is spread out and raked over and over to convince the grain it's spring and time to germinate, releasing the starches that are locked inside. It's then dried with peat smoke to add flavor and ground into flour, sometimes with 19th century machinery, and then mixed with hot water, transforming the starches into a sugary concoction called mash.
Smell that, Bob?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that, you can smell the goodness.
Yeast is then added, changing the sugar into alcohol, a primitive ale, which is then cooked a couple of times in copper stills, where the vapor is collected and condensed into this clear liquid.
And that's the stuff we want to go into the barrel.
But what I'm looking at is this looks like rubbing alcohol. This is, in fact, a whiskey.
It's very good. If you need a rub, there's no doubt about it.
I bet it would be good. But once it goes into the barrel, from then it's just time.
It's just time. And it's a great journey, you know. This is a child, but the cask is the mother. And that's what makes the journey. If you give a good cask, you're bound to get a good child. It's that simple.
It takes less than 3 weeks to make, but requires at least 10 years of aging in these oak casks, which add flavor and color to turn it into world-class single malt whiskey.
You'll see some of the names. There's Clement Springs, Buffalo Trace, Jim Beam.
Bob was surprised to learn that 97% of the casks used to make single malt whiskey had been previously used to age American bourbon and bought secondhand from U.S. distillers. It's testimony to the ingenuity and frugality of the Scots, who have very few oak trees.
Without the American barrel, there would be no whiskey industry. It's as simple as that.
A sophisticated palate will detect a hint of the oak and bourbon in Islay single malt, as well as the sweetness of sherry that comes from wine casks bought in Europe. Before the final product is sold, it will have done time in a number of different casks. Master distiller Jim McEwen is the one who decides when to rotate them and when each barrel is ready to be bottled. He opened a young cask for Bob to sample.
I would describe that as mellow yellow, absolutely pure.
And it's only 7 years old.
That's right. Young whiskies are like young people. They're vibrant, they're full of life. In fact, this for me is like coming home from work. At the end of the day, I work really hard. Nobody appreciates me. My wife doesn't appreciate me. My kids don't appreciate me. Life's a bitch.
Couple of glasses of that and it doesn't matter.
A couple of shots of that and I am the king of the world.
Absolutely. You know, frankly, I never liked this stuff, but the way you're talking me into it.
But you got to check every barrel.
I certainly hope so. Cheers.
McEwen is the man responsible for the taste and consistency of the whiskeys at Bruichladdich, which requires a very personal involvement with the product.
I have heard you described as the cask whisperer.
I do talk to casks, there's no doubt about it.
In what language?
Mainly English, and it depends how many whiskies I've had. If I'd had a few whiskies, I tend to revert to the Gaelic language, so I'm talking to the cask. It's just one of these things, you go into the warehouse and you pop the bung out, you draw your sample, yeah, and you look at it and you think, wow, you're beautiful. But you're not just ready yet. Tell you what, I'm going to come back and see you in 3 months, okay? And other times you find a cask which is so incredibly good, you can't not speak. You say, oh my God, you are the most beautiful thing I have ever tasted in my life. You know, and you think, oh jeez, I just want to share this with somebody. But there's nobody around, there's just me and the cask.
We'll stay.
On most days, McEwen devotes several hours to quality control, checking up on several hundred casks.
But it's a fantastic job, nosing and tasting whiskies.
And you can still walk out of here in the evening?
Occasionally I need some help, there's no doubt about that, yeah.
Dying devotion to one's whiskey is apparently not all that unusual. While we were on Islay, the camera crew ran into a party of Canadians, the friends and family of a deceased single malt lover named Bill, who wanted his ashes scattered in the waters opposite his favorite distillery. Funds for the pilgrimage were set aside in his will.
That's what I wanted. It's good, it's good. To Bill.
Bill, Angela.
Now he's happy. Now he's happy.
After that, the only thing left was for Bob to say goodbye to Jim McEwen, and it turned out to be last call for our old pal, Bob Simon.
Cheers, Bob. Hope you've enjoyed this little visit here.
You're speaking in the past, it's not over.
Yeah, I'm going to get you out of here, man. This is you're costing me a fortune.